The linkage between the message that your behavior sends to your mind, if you're rushing around and you're jerking around and you're moving like really quickly and erratic, or you're trying to do 3 things at once, like all of that behavior that we do when we feel busy, what it does is it sends a warning signal to your mind, an anxiety signal to your mind, a danger signal to your mind, and says, we aren't okay. So you feel anxious. You're listening to episode 227 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Building Psychological Strength podcast. My name is April and I'm your host. I want to say really quick before we dive in, I would just want to give a really big shout out and a big thank you to everyone who's been listening to us over the years. I'm mentioning this a bit recently in episodes because I've been logging into the service that we use to syndicate the podcast, and every single month our downloads are going up by more than what I would expect them to go up. And this growth that we're experiencing is because of you, and we want to say thank you. Every single time you share an episode with somebody else, every single time you hit the subscribe button, every time you download an individual episode, every time you rate and review, all of that makes more of a difference than I can even describe in the growth of this podcast. So if you're ever thinking, oh, April, that was like a really cool nugget of information that really helped me out in my life, if you could just go hit a review on or a rating on iTunes, that is literally all the thanks that we need in order to keep going and building this podcast, because that makes a huge difference in terms of who sees us. So thank you. Thank you. Please keep it up. Holy cow, high five. We are all growing together. Now, this week is interesting. It came off of an interesting conversation I had with a family member. And I'm not going to say who that family member is, but they are an older generation family member of mine. And they were talking about how they have been enjoying being outside during COVID and going on walks. And we thought, oh, that's really cool. Glad you're getting out. Where are you going? Oh, just around our house. Well, and then we asked, we knew of this nice area in these people's town. And we said, well, why don't you go to this, call it a park? Why don't you go to this park to walk? It's so beautiful. And they said, well, we don't have time to go there. It's like 20 minutes there and back. They're retired. Like they're retired. I mean, there's nothing going on. But here's the thing, and this is what sparked the idea for this episode. It feels like, and this is a very realistic feeling. I don't doubt that they feel this way. It feels like there's not enough time to invest 20 minutes in driving someplace to go walk in a beautiful setting and then 20 minutes to come back. It feels like we're too busy for that. And how many times, I'll ask, the audience listening to this, and also ask myself, how many times in an average day do I feel like I'm too busy to do something that really, does it take that long? Really, are you? And what that got me thinking about is something that we're toying around with and jokingly calling this hustle culture, this culture of feeling like we are always in a hurry. Everything is always too busy. We always have too much to do. We couldn't possibly take the time or slow down. And that's what we want to dive into. So hello, Ashley. Thanks for being here. Super pumped.
Sorry about giggling in the background, but
no worries. Yeah, the retired people who have and I mean, they do have social engagements and other things that, they're doing in their time, but it's not I promise they can find 20 minutes to drive.
I think it's such an interesting, I'm excited to talk about this because this isn't really something you and I have had in-depth conversations about yet. So I'm excited to see what thoughts have been rattling around in your mind and to share some of the things in mine as I knew we were planning this. And it's really interesting when I think about just this hurry up hustle culture. That's hard to say. And in this like busyness and the reasons why it's there and how much of it is we are actually too busy and spread too thin. And why is that happening? And how much of it is just a misperception? And where does that come from? And then what do we do about it? So this is going to be a fun one.
Yeah. And I love that you started off there because as I was thinking about this, I started doing a little nerdy research and digging around to see what have other people uncovered about this. And I found sort of this body of work that I'm not going to point to any one study or so, but I'll just try to summarize what I found in looking at a few places. But basically, there has been some work, longitudinal work over time that has measured how many hours a day people spend in paid work and unpaid work and that type of thing. And largely, it hasn't changed that much over time. People still spend, especially in paid work, they still spend about the same amount of time doing paid work as we did a while ago. I can't remember the exact amount of time that was in this study. But our perception of how our day feels is so much different. It feels a lot busier.
Right.
And the crazy thing was something they uncovered as to why. And this like hit me in the face, especially given the type of work that I do, probably the type of work that you do, when you see patients, that type of thing. If you think about the way that the nature of our work has changed over time, it used to be that the tasks, the work we did, and the problems we solved were very task-oriented. It was very task-oriented work, very task-oriented problems.
Check
we need
it off the to-do list.
Yeah, do this paperwork, mail this thing, file this thing, have, make that presentation, whatever it happened to be. It was very task-oriented. So you could make a list and you could definitively check those items off because they were black and white done when they were done. That has really changed. And I've read a lot of literature in like the innovation space and the emergence of technology and all of this stuff that highlights what this article was saying as well, is that the problems we face in this day and age are not task problems. We've largely found robots and machines and computers and other awesome non-human things that take care of a lot of that for us, or we've found very efficient ways to get that done. Right. So largely that's not how we spend our time anymore. But how we do spend our time is on stuff that they would call knowledge work. This is stuff where, are you ever done with knowledge? You're never done with knowledge, right? There's always more you could learn. There's always another thing you could read. There's always another edit you could make. So largely our work as a whole, like as a whole community, culture, whatever, has shifted from being very task-oriented, where it feels really nice and tidy at the end of the day, like I'm done, you're quote, done, to today where you have to just draw a line and say you're going to be finished, but there's no clean break. How cool is that? But also awful.
Well, but it makes complete sense when I think about that, even for someone like me, where I have my appointments and those have a discrete start and stop, but it's the behind the scenes. What could I have done differently? What could I do better? What am I doing next? Right. So it's not this person or this meeting is wrapped up in a neat little bow. And I think that's important to kind of think about, that while our hours may not have changed in terms of number of hours, it's the feel of those hours, the psychological weight that has. You know what? This is just popping in my mind right now, but our brain's full of glitches, and I love to nerd out about that. But one of them is that they are designed to go to a stopping point, right? They like to go
That's
to
interesting.
End. Right. Well, this is why like Netflix and binging is like such a phenomenon now, is because Pre-streaming, your episode ended, and then you would get up and move away because like you have to wait till next week to watch the next episode of Friends. Now, Netflix, Amazon, all of those, it just rolls into the next one. And our brain is designed to go to the end. That's why also on social media, you can scroll and scroll and scroll and lose all this time. We're going to the end. Now, when I take that and I put it with this knowledge work, there's no end. So no wonder it's hard to set aside work, or we feel busy all the time or pressured to keep doing things, because it's not like when you could go to work, clock out, and you were done and you got this really clear break between work and non-work.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many factors that play into that. Just this small slice of the literature that we're talking about, right? You mentioned the endless Netflix cycle. We know that now I can't even think of one that doesn't. All social media has an endless feed. Do you remember back in the early days of Facebook, you could finish Facebook?
Yeah.
You could finish it.
Yeah.
This is like, we're dating ourselves here a little bit, but like for real, in the beginning days of Facebook, you could just hit the end of your feed and there was just nothing else to look at and you were done. That doesn't happen anymore. Every app has an endless scroll, and every app has notifications to bring us back into the endless scroll. They're made and constructed in a way so as to seem urgent and important and something that needs our attention. So we're being drawn back in to never-ending tasks or never-ending behaviors. I don't even know what to call them. Activities, I guess.
Yeah,
activities that in the end make us feel like we've never actually finished anything. That's incredible.
Well, and then let's take this too, if we're kind of shifting from like knowledge work to never ending to technology. I think part of why we feel busy all the time is because we get notifications, because we're on the clock all the time. And what that does, if someone can text you, email you, message you, whatever, at any hour, your nervous system never really gets to relax. It's always a little bit on edge. And so that's going to make us feel this busy, this stressed, and this pressured. And the other point that comes to mind is when we're spending the time with our devices, with these mindless scrolling, with all of this stuff, we may not actually be doing the tasks that need to get done or spending our mental energy on the things that we need to. It eats up a chunk of your time. And then you really do have to get a lot done.
And so it eats up a chunk of your bandwidth. We've talked so many times on here about our limited cognitive capacity. We only have so much capacity for attention, motivation, decision-making, emotional capacity, regulation capacity, just keeping ourselves in line as good, decent human being adults. We only have so much capacity in that. And the more that we are trying to drain these endless I'm just going to call them feeds, whether it's a social media feed, Netflix, or even just, I'll put my hand up and say, there was a level to which I probably needed to go to look at some research for this episode. And I went several steps further than that because you can't finish the internet. Like you can't get done.
It's a never-ending web. Yeah.
Yes. And the interesting thing here too is that I want to talk to the high achievers out there for just a second. Those who are people of very high responsibility, who want to do a good job, who maybe are a little bit more prone to perfectionism, prone to wanting to put a good product out there. If you have to decide when to draw a line in the sand and be, quote, done, and there's a bottomless pit there, the anxiety that bottomless pit can cause because you didn't finish. Even though it's an impossible task, you didn't finish. There's some cool research. It's so awful. Like poor people, whoever had to do the research that social cognitive psychologists did. So the stuff that I did in grad school is awful. Like never sign up for those studies and help those researchers out, but just like get ready to have a really bad time. So one of the things that some of these studies would do is they would give groups of people a cognitive riddle or task or puzzle or maze or something like that, something that required a lot of concentration. That was impossible. There wasn't a solution. You couldn't get done with it. Like you couldn't finish. It's not possible. And measure how long people persist. And high achieving people will persist like orders of magnitude longer at these impossible tasks, like draining the internet or finishing Netflix.
Well, and then look at what that's doing, eating up your 24 hours, right? We all have the same 24 hours. So if you're going down and drawing that line 82 levels later than someone else, that's just eating up your time and contributing to that busy feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just wild because that study did such a nice job of saying, okay, there's this number of hours that we spend working, and we've no doubt increased our efficiency over time. We as a population get more done in the same amount of time than we used to. That's incredible. And that's a large part in thanks to this incredible technology and whatever that we've put in place. But the number of hours is very similar. It's just the way that our poor hardware interacts with a more modern climate or context that makes it feel busier.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And with this busy hustle culture, I also think about a conversation that I had with my mom years ago when I was first starting out and landed my dream job. It was awesome. And I was working a lot. And it was work that I felt good about. It was like, it's important work. I felt good. But I remember having a conversation with my mom and she said like, wow, every time I talk to you, you're just so busy. Because that's what I had been saying to her. How are you? I'm so busy. I'm so busy. I'm so busy. And then I came across this article that I read that was more like a blog post, but about busyness as a badge of honor. And it made me think, for me, that definitely was kind of wrapped up in what it means to be professional and doing a good job, and that this sort of should or expectation that we need to be busy. And in our culture, at least in the US, that's very much a piece of it, right? I see it with kids who are involved in like 19 different extracurriculars, plus their homework, plus their school. There's no time to relax and play outside and be a kid anymore. And that's happening for adults too. So we've got these real or perceived expectations, these pressures to do more, which makes it hard to say no. We've got that whole, it makes me think of FOMO, like the fear of missing out. So we say yes to all of these things that we don't really actually want to do, and then pay the price in being very busy.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because I think a lot of that falls back on where we as a culture derive our value, our identity value. And a lot of it is, and this is funny because I've talked about this on our Friday business episodes around the value that we place in terms of our personal identity, our value as a human being. So much of it gets wrapped up in our work,
right?
That somehow the busier you are, the more you have going on, the more valuable you are. So what you're really trying to signal to other people is, I'm important, I'm valuable, I'm playing a big role.
Right.
And in the 9-to-5 normal job space, this definitely exists. In the entrepreneurial world, it's really interesting because truly, in a lot of cases, at the beginning of a business, the busier you are, the more successful you are, the more opportunities you're getting, the more maybe services you're selling or products you're having to make in order to fulfill orders or whatever that happens to be. And you know what the funny thing is? We've talked a ton on this podcast, and this is kind of transitioning into why this hustle culture and being busy is not a good thing. We've talked a lot about caring for ourselves first, seeing ourselves as the asset that we are and taking care of that asset so that we can show up and, perform in the way that we want to. That doesn't take care of that asset, that burns that asset out.
Right.
And one of the reasons, and I noticed this in myself as an entrepreneur, and I wanted to it was like a punch in the face the day that I realized this. I'm like, part of the reason why I don't want maybe to give myself a break, I don't want to take care of myself, is because this sounds so horrible. That is a billable hour that I'm not making money off of. I was literally trying to put a monetary value and like a price tag on me doing basic care and feeding of my human self. That's ridiculous.
I so appreciate you admitting that out loud, because you're not the only one, right? And I think it's important to acknowledge that we equate busy with success or busy with money. And those are things that we value in our culture. Busy with self-worth or value as a human. Those are important to notice.
Yeah. But you know, what's really funny? We equate busy with success or hard work, but it's not a good correlation. I think back to some of the times that I worked the hardest in my life. I was broke. I had no money. I was working
school.
I know. I was working so hard, so many hours, so quote unquote busy, way more hours than I do today. And I was broke. It does not correlate. Like monetary value does not correlate with how busy you are.
No, it doesn't. And there are a lot of other downsides besides that, like just the burnout and the burning through our, emotional and intellectual and cognitive resources. There are other costs here too. And part of this, like, hurry up and get through it mentality means we're missing out on the present moment. Right? Like if we look at time, I know you and I are both big believers in viewing time as the most important non-renewable resource you have. You can get more money. You cannot get more time. Right. And when we're bustling through it, we're squandering this precious resource. And I'm not saying don't work hard. April and I, we both work hard, but it's redefining, I think, our relationship with time and with busyness. Right. And I know, oh man, my mind's going in like 14 different directions. Like there's the difference between like action and busyness, right? Like, I can be busy running on a treadmill, but I'm doing something, but I'm not getting anywhere. Versus if I'm running outside, I'm getting somewhere. So looking at action versus busyness. And I think we really need to adjust some of our mindsets around this. Like back to your family member who's retired, it's sort of a different ballgame, right? There's just this perception of, oh, I don't have enough time. So it's almost like this scarcity mindset, which I'm saying, yes, we only have so much time, but we need to look at how we spend it and the quality of how we spend it. Like take 20 minutes to go. Or what else are you doing with that time? Netflixing, scrolling? Is that a good way to spend it? It's going to get spent either way. So how are you spending it and how are you showing up? And that matters.
I would even argue. So of course, like it's easy to say, you could have spent that time doing something that fulfills you, that whatever, instead of scrolling on social media or doing something mindless. I would even argue though, that spending that time taking care of yourself and having some spaciousness in your day, having a little bit of give back to yourself is worth it, even if the time you're spending is taking away from something, quote, valuable. And I'll give an example that I've given before on the podcast where, I've got 2 young kids and they go to daycare and school full time. So at the end of the day, I used to literally run my day up right until the moment I absolutely had to run out of the house and go pick my kids up from school. And it was total and utter burnout. I was exhausted, just mentally, physically. I was on edge. I was crabby. It was terrible. And my reason for that is I want to spend as much time with my kids as possible. During the week, young kids go to bed relatively early. Sometimes, for God's sake, go to bed sometimes. But usually they go to bed really early and you don't get a lot of quality time with them in the evening. So you're trying to make the most of that. But what I was doing was exactly what you say, conflating the quantity of time that I was spending with my kids with the quality of that time. And I noticed that as I was burning out more and more, I realized toward the end of the day, I'm like, what if I shut my computer down 20 minutes early? What if that's how I planned my day out? I'm a big planner. So I'm going to plan to do that at the beginning of the day, and then I'm going to execute toward it. That's how it's going to happen. I'm going to shut my computer down. I'm just not going to go for those 20 minutes. I'm not going to leave right away. I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to drink a cup of coffee, or I'm going to listen to a podcast, or maybe I will scroll on social media, because that is like such a rare luxury for me these days that maybe I'll just decompress that way. Or maybe I'll read a few pages in, a fiction book or something like that. And it got to the point where I realized, like, if I'm going to give up a little bit of that quantity, oh my God, the quality was so much better. I would pick them up excited to see them. And it was so different than when I was sprinting out the door to go get them from
Right.
just having closed my laptop.
But I think that that's such a powerful example. And it makes me think about, well, really the phrase going through my mind, it's like, well, when people say that's money well spent, meaning it was like worth the investment. In this case, it was 20 minutes well spent. It was worth the investment of that time so that you could show up differently.
Incredible ROI.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it makes me think about, the quality of our time. I remember, being on a walk and like literally stopping to smell the flowers in my neighbor's yard. And it just sort of happened naturally, but this was well into my mindfulness practice, my reevaluating my relationship with time and the kind of journey here of looking at, values and living in line with them. And yes, I was exercising and I want to keep my heart rate up and this and that, but like stopping to smell the metaphorical roses is such an important part of life, because when we hurry up and get through, you're missing out on these little moments. So taking that time to be present, to breathe, to just, I know you and I both use the phrase quite a lot, move with ease.
Yeah.
Like I noticed that, when people are really when we feel really busy, we're moving quickly. And that just adds to this perceived, I don't have enough time, I'm running behind, that stress. And if you can just slow it down and move with ease, it can change your experience.
Well, something that I've learned from you that is so related to that is we harp all the time about this fictitious line between our body and our mind, right? Like this, it's dumb. Like somehow our brain is in our body, but it's not part of our body. It's totally separate. And there's a big line right at our neck with that, except our sinuses. That's also our body. I mean, like, this is so stupid, right? It's so dumb. But I learned from you and I started this move with ease thing because of you, because of the linkage between the message that your behavior sends to your mind. If you're rushing around and you're jerking around and you're moving like really quickly and erratic, or you're trying to do 3 things at once, like all of that behavior that we do when we feel busy, what it does is it sends a warning signal to your mind, an anxiety signal to your mind, a danger signal to your mind, and says, we aren't okay. So you feel anxious. So you behave more erratically. So you feel anxious. So you behave more erratically. And around the spiral goes. It was game changing to say, I'm going to change my behavior. And it's funny how my mind feels different now.
Yeah. Well, and I hear that not just on the anxiety side, but on the anger side, right? Like how many parents you're getting frustrated with your kids, it's bedtime and there's that, you're getting louder and more frantic. If you can move with ease, settles it down. And sometimes taking a few minutes longer is the right thing to do because it changes the feel or it changes that quality.
Yeah. Absolutely. Something that's interesting too in relation to that, it's now had a ripple effect. So when I think back to growing up, I remember a lot of busy signals coming from my family, like, hurry, we don't have time. Come on. We have to go. Like, we got to go. And it was always this like very erratic, like fast, rushed feeling. Right. And I've noticed and made it an intention to say to my kids often, I'm like, you don't have to hurry. We have tons of time. Like, no, take your time. You're doing great. Like, no, you're doing great. You can just try it again. Like, we have tons of time. Because ultimately, those 2 mindsets, the rush, and the, no, you're okay. Just take your time. What is the difference? Like, let's say it's my kid putting her coat on. Really, how much faster are we going to arrive at the car? It might be a matter of 3 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
Is that 3 minutes literally that big of a deal? And I'm saying all of this as though I have this figured out. This is a deep-seated problem for me. So friends listening to this know that this is something that I'm intentionally working on, and I'm literally just sharing the stuff that's working for me.
Yeah, but I think that's such a great thing to bring up. And it just matters. I mean, like language matters so much. Thoughts are just language inside our head, and it matters. And I think tweaking your language can have a huge impact on the thought habits that you develop and how you feel and what you do. And so it makes me think of like the difference between saying like, oh, I'm sorry I'm late, or thank you for waiting. Either way, I'm addressing the same thing. I showed up a few minutes late, but I'm sorry primes me for I did something wrong and you should be angry at me. Thank you primes me for gratitude. And it makes the other person feel good, like they did something nice. That's just language. That's like put some spin on it. So yeah.
I love it.
Kind of shifting just a bit, but I knew we were going to talk about this. And I just so happened, the book I was reading talked about this study that's so relevant. And it's kind of another downside of being too busy. These sneaky researchers, probably social cog psychologists, had this group of these seminary students. And they had one group and they were in one building. And then the whole premise was you have to get to this other building for a presentation. They told the first group, you have plenty of time. Okay. They told the second group, if you leave right now, you can just make it. And they told the third group, you're going to be pushing it. You better hurry or you're going to be late. All three of these groups, they go on their way to the other building. They passed a human being in distress, someone who needed help. Guess what? Those who had plenty of time stopped. Overwhelming majority stopped to help. Those in the you better hurry up, you're going to be late group, only like 10% of them stopped. And it was a big moment because it was this connection to me of almost everybody I know. If I ask, what kind of person do you want to be? People value some version of caring, helping, compassionate. We want to be decent human beings. When we are busy and when we're in that hustle culture, it really shuts down our compassion. So much so that the overwhelming majority of people did not stop to help someone in distress. And to me, that was like a yikes moment of, am I able to live my values, assuming that's a value, if I'm busy, 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 busy? And how can I break that habit? And sure, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm all for being punctual. I really hate to run late. I get that. But just look at what that mindset did.
Yeah. And I like the connection that you're making to values, because when we think about this from a life design standpoint, that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to figure out what matters to you as an individual, and then craft the way that you structure your day, the type of job you have, the decisions you make, the behaviors you do. You craft them in alignment with those things that you care about and with your strengths and with your identity and the type of person that you want to be. And when you're in a situation that's pulling you out of that, a lot of things happen just psychologically that don't put you in a great situation. Everybody's heard of cognitive dissonance, right? Where your actions and your beliefs are not in alignment. It causes some friction psychologically, and it's not the healthiest place for us to stay in. We find ourselves having to make justifications and split hairs about why we behaved the way we did and why it's not actually a contrary thing. And now you're thinking and contemplating, and you're adding more to that mental load that you've got. So you're right. Like, if we're adding this factor of busyness that's causing us to behave in a way that isn't the type of person we want to be.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of ripple effect from that. Yeah. So then when I think about what to do, immediately my mind goes to, there's this saying in business where, and I can't remember, there's a name to it, the blah, blah effect of somehow. I don't know what it is, but it's basically stuff a task will fill up the amount of time that you schedule for it. So if you schedule a meeting for 15 minutes, it's crazy. You're just able to get it done in 15 minutes. But if you schedule it for a half hour or an hour, it will take that long. You will just balloon out and fill up the amount of space that you give it. And if you think about it, this knowledge work situation versus task work has a lot to do with it. You'll literally just keep scrolling or digging until you reach your time limit.
Right.
So there's a hint there. Set a time limit. Don't try to drain the internet. Don't try to drain the body of research in a particular area unless you're getting your PhD. And I'm sorry, you have to, and that's just how it is. But unless that's the case, set a time limit. I'm going to work on researching that presentation for an hour today, and then work for an hour today instead of trying to drain this endless supply of knowledge.
Absolutely. And that gets to, scheduling and planning. And I mean, you have to be flexible because things come up that are out of your control. But I think in general, that's a really useful practice because we're making our decisions ahead of time. So what we're doing then is we're taking our mind out of the equation. We're taking our feelings out of the equation at that moment. And then we can stick with this is what's important. Along with that, the whole, is it urgent and important? Kind of looking at those two dimensions. A lot of time we get busy because things get piled on us or our time gets hijacked by asks and requests and demands from other people. And then we don't even get to take care of the things that are most important, like exercise or feed yourself or do that project that really matters to you. And so there becomes this, whether you want to call it boundary setting, being assertive and saying no, or you can look at it as a scheduling thing. Like I think sometimes it's really helpful not to check your email before 10 a.m. I run later in the day, so I'm not up at 5 like you are. But setting that time so that you can do something that really matters in your day before you get hijacked by other people.
Yeah.
And so some of that, it becomes, it's intentional.
Yeah.
And building new habits.
Well, and on that habit building piece, I think about the notion of building in just white space in your calendar, having, right? So I've talked a lot on the podcast about my morning routine, and I do a ton of planning. Every single morning I plan out my day. Every week I plan out the week ahead. Every month I plan out that month, if not longer. Because then I always feel like I know what's coming in terms of big events, big projects, when they're going to happen. I'm constantly jockeying and moving things around so that stuff feels okay. But part of that practice is, where do my workouts fit? Where does some like downtime fit? Which evenings is it going to fit into? Because my husband works shift work. So like there's some complexity there and figuring that out. But during the day, every single morning, my journal that I use asks me, and I kind of modify it. It says, what will make today great? But I modify it to, what can I do to make today great? What do I need?
I like that.
And it's always, what is the thing that you need most? Do you need a nap? Do you need good food? Do you need just time to veg? Do you need excitement? Do you need coffee? Do you need, what is it? Like, what are you going to need today? A good long run? Do you need to talk to somebody? What are your needs? Schedule them in. And I say this because when you make that decision for yourself, guess who you are accountable to? No one else. You're not required to tell anybody else what you're doing to give yourself spaciousness. You're not required to justify the fact that you took time off for yourself. So I say this because in the beginning, it's going to feel gross. It's going to feel like you're doing something wrong, like you're being lazy, like you're not being valuable, whatever. You don't have to tell anyone. Do it on the down low for a while until it feels comfortable and you realize how awesome the situation is. Then you can start telling people and leading by example, but you do not have to do that in the beginning. Schedule it in, get yourself okay, and move from there.
Well, I think that's so important because I see this all the time, is that people don't prioritize. We prioritize work and commitments over things like self-care and exercise and sleep and eating. And these are things that are really, they're non-negotiable. And we could probably talk for a whole hour on like the consequences of not taking care of these things. Also needs include social connection, leisure time. Grown-ups need to play too.
Yeah. We talked about a lot of this in the virus fatigue episode with the conditions to thrive. It's like basic things that humans need for care and feeding.
There's only 24 hours in the day. And so you do have to make some tough calls when it comes to prioritizing. And I find myself, I've probably said this 4 times this week already, just in different conversations with people, is that life is full of problems. And solving one problem creates another one. And so we kind of just need to expect that solving one problem will create another one. And here's where I'm going with this, tying it here, is I get it. You're going to have all of this like pressure, either external or internal of, but I have to do this. I can't say no. I can't turn off my email. I have to be available. Nope. That's just a problem that you have to be willing to have in order to make time for these other needs. And if you don't, you say, I don't have time for these other needs. That's going to create a different problem when your health tanks, when your mental health tanks, which there's that, it just all together, when your health tanks, when your relationships tank, when you're burned out. So solving one problem might create another one, but stick with it. Because to April's point, if you do these things and you're carving out this time, it will get easier. That's where we get to use cognitive dissonance to our advantage. Because if you stick with it, then your brain's going to go, oh, well, shoot, I guess we do this. I'm the kind of person who prioritizes these things. And then it gets easier.
Yep, it absolutely does. I think that's an amazing place to put a punctuation mark on what is probably part one of this discussion. I bet we'll do another episode on this because it feels like there's more to talk about here. But the take-home points here are that it's like so many things. We've got this mind that was set up and evolved to work in a setting that is so much different than what today's modern society is. And it creates some friction points and some issues for us, meaning this feeling of busyness and the way that we interact with that feeling doesn't help our situation any. So we need to just be aware of the fact that some of these factors are at play and get creative about how we structure our day, maybe defining what is done, not as a task checked off, but as an amount of time accomplished or another way of doing that. So I would urge you to just get creative and think about, on your busiest, quote, busiest times, how might you make adjustments to the way that you think about when a task is done or what needs to happen or by whom, because it sets you up in a situation to where you can have that bit of space to take care of yourself and have the ripple effect of how you're doing be one that is in line with the way that you want it to be, not one that's going in a direction that doesn't feel good.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode. Try this out. Give this stuff give this stuff a shot. Shoot us a note. Let us know how it's going. If you have issues with this or problems that you want us to talk about, topics, shoot us a note. We'd love to hear from you, and we would love to cover it on a future episode. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be back next week with another fun topic to dive into. It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so. But today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.